Imagine someone told you that a single book was so powerful, so dangerous, and so disruptive to the way society functions that you were officially forbidden from turning its pages. It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, but the reality is that book banning has been a part of human history for centuries, and it is happening right now more than you might think. Whether it's because of political ideas, social challenges, or simply words that people found too uncomfortable to handle, some of the world's most famous stories have been locked away, ripped from library shelves, and tossed into the fire. Today, get ready, because we are diving into the fascinating, controversial, and often bizarre history of every major banned book explained in detail. First up, we have to talk about the absolute heavyweight of the banned book world, 1984 by George Orwell. This is the book that gave us terms like Big Brother, thought crime, and doublethink. Written in 1949, it describes a chilling future where a totalitarian government monitors every single move and thought of its citizens. Now, you would think that a book warning against government overreach would be welcomed, but it has been banned consistently across the globe for decades. In the former Soviet Union, it was banned because it was seen as a direct attack on their political system. Meanwhile, in some parts of the United States, parents and schools have tried to ban it for being pro-communist, or for having content they deemed too intense for students. It is a strange paradox where both sides of the political spectrum have found reasons to fear Orwell's vision. The reason it remains so dangerous to those in power is its core message that language and truth are the ultimate tools of freedom. When you control what people can say, you control what they can think, and that is a reality many authorities would rather you not contemplate. Next on the list is a book that almost every student has encountered and almost every school board has debated, which is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. You might wonder why such a celebrated classic would face so much pushback. The reasons are layered. For decades, it was challenged because of its use of racial slurs and its honest, painful depiction of prejudice. Some argued that the language was too offensive to be taught in classrooms. However, in more recent years, the conversation has shifted. Some critics argue that the book presents a white savior narrative that doesn't adequately center the experience of the victims of injustice. Whether the pressure comes from the left or the right, the result is the same. The book gets pulled from the curriculum. But despite the controversies, the story of Atticus Finch and his children remains a pillar of literature because it forces us to look at the uncomfortable reality of our own history and our own biases. It is a book that asks us to walk in someone else's shoes. And apparently, that is a journey some people aren't ready to take. Transitioning to something a bit more modern but equally controversial, we have the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. It might seem hard to believe that a story about a boy wizard could be considered dangerous, but in the late 90s and early 2000s, Harry Potter was the most frequently challenged book in America. The primary reason? Religious objections. Many groups argued that the books promoted witchcraft, occultism, and magic, which they believed went against their spiritual values. Some even claimed the books were a gateway to dark practices. Beyond the religious aspect, some parents were concerned that the themes of rebellion against authority and the increasingly dark tone of the later books were inappropriate for children. There were even instances of book burnings in small towns. Despite all this, Harry Potter became a global phenomenon, proving that the more you tell people they can't have something, the more they are going to want to read it. It sparked a reading revolution for an entire generation, but it also served as a reminder that even fairy tales can be seen as a threat to established beliefs. Now let's talk about a book that was banned almost before it even hit the shelves, and that is Ulysses by James Joyce. Published in 1922, this book is famous for being incredibly difficult to read, but it was also considered incredibly scandalous. It was banned in the United Kingdom and the United States for years due to its obscene content. The book follows a single day in the life of Leopold Bloom in Dublin, and Joyce decided to include very realistic, raw details about human biology and thoughts that were simply not discussed in polite society back then. It led to a landmark court case in the US where a judge finally ruled that the book was not immoral, but rather an honest attempt to portray human life. This ruling was a massive victory for freedom of speech and artistic expression. But for a long time, if you were caught with a copy of Ulysses, you were seen as a rebel or even a criminal. It shows how the definition of decency changes over time, and what one generation calls filth, another calls high art. Another major entry in the history of banned literature is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. For a long time, this was the book that every misunderstood teenager carried around. Because of Holden's frequent use of profanity and his cynical view of society, the book was banned in countless schools across the United States. Many adults feared that Holden's rebellion would rub off on their children and lead to a breakdown in discipline. Interestingly, the book has also been found in the possession of several high-profile individuals who committed acts of violence, which added a dark layer of notoriety to its reputation. However, most readers see it as a poignant and honest coming-of-age story. It remains a target of censors because it validates the feelings of frustration that many young people feel toward the adult world. And that kind of validation can be seen as a threat to traditional authority. Moving into the realm of science fiction, we find Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This one is particularly ironic because it is a book about a future where books are banned and burned. Bradbury wrote it during the era of McCarthyism in the United States, a time when voices were being silenced and people were terrified of being labeled as subversives. The book was ironically censored and edited by publishers who wanted to remove certain words to make it safer for school audiences, which is exactly what the book warns against. It has been challenged for its depiction of a godless society and for its anti-authoritarian themes. Bradbury's vision of a society distracted by giant television screens and shallow entertainment feels more relevant today than ever. The fact that people have tried to ban a book that warns against banning books is a perfect example of why we need to keep these stories alive. It remains a powerful defense of the written word and the importance of critical thinking. Let's look at a classic of American literature that has faced a century of challenges. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, often called the Great American Novel. It has been banned almost since the day it was published in 1884. Initially, it was banned by libraries for being vulgar and for Huck's low-class language and behavior. As time went on, the reasons for banning it shifted toward the racial language used throughout the book. Critics argue that the frequent use of racial slurs makes it a painful and offensive experience for students, while defenders argue that Twain was using that language to satirize and criticize the very racism of the time. This debate is still raging today in school districts across the country. It is a book that confronts the original sin of America, and because it does so in a way that is raw and unfiltered, it remains one of the most polarizing texts in the classroom. We cannot talk about banned books without mentioning Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Similar to 1984, this is a dystopian look at the future, but instead of a boot stamping on a face, it's a world where everyone is kept happy through drugs, sex, and shallow consumption. It has been banned and challenged for its themes of sexual promiscuity, its depiction of a world without family or religion, and its supposed anti-Christian stance. Many parents and school boards found the idea of a genetically engineered society where people are conditioned for their roles too disturbing for students. However, Huxley's warning about a society that loses its humanity in exchange for comfort and pleasure is incredibly prescient. It is banned because it challenges the comfort of our own consumer-driven lives and asks us if we are willing to sacrifice our freedom for a life of easy happiness. In the world of children's literature, one of the most surprising entries is The Lorax by Dr. Seuss. You wouldn't think the guy who wrote Green Eggs and Ham would be a threat, but The Lorax was actually banned in some logging towns in the late 80s. Why? Because it was seen as anti-logging and pro-environmentalist propaganda. The story of a creature who speaks for the trees against a greedy industrialist was considered a direct attack on the livelihood of people in those communities. It is a fascinating example of how a book can be banned not for being obscene or dangerous in a general sense, but because it challenges the specific economic interests of a group of people. It shows that environmentalism was, and still is, a deeply political and controversial topic, even in the form of a rhyming children's book. Next up is The Color Purple by Alice Walker. This novel, which won the Pulitzer Prize, deals with the incredibly difficult lives of African American women in the rural South during the early 20th century. It has been a constant target for censors due to its graphic depictions of domestic and sexual violence, as well as its honest exploration of human relationships. Many school boards have labeled it filth or pornographic, but these labels often ignore the deep spiritual and emotional journey of the characters. The book is banned because it gives a voice to those who have been marginalized and silenced, and it refuses to look away from the harsh realities of their existence. It is a story of resilience and triumph, but the road to that triumph is paved with truths that many find too difficult to handle. Switching gears to something that was banned for being politically incorrect on a massive scale, we have Animal Farm, another George Orwell classic. This allegorical novella uses farm animals to tell the story of the Russian Revolution and the rise of Stalinism. During the Cold War, it was a centerpiece of Western education, but in communist countries, it was strictly forbidden. Even in some Western countries, it faced challenges from those who feared it might incite radicalism or that it was too complex for younger readers. The book is banned because it is a perfect deconstruction of how power corrupts and how revolutions can be betrayed by their leaders. It is a warning that applies to any political system, not just the one Orwell was parodying, and that is why it remains a threat to those who want to maintain absolute control. Let's talk about a book that was banned for being too real for teenagers, Forever by Judy Blume. Judy Blume is practically the queen of banned books because she wrote about the things teenagers actually think and do, rather than what adults wish they did. Forever was one of the first young adult novels to honestly depict a teenage girl's first sexual relationship. It was banned in school libraries and public libraries across the country because it was seen as promoting sexual activity among minors. Bloom's work has always been a target because she tackles puberty, menstruation, bullying, and sexuality with a frankness that makes many adults uncomfortable. But for the millions of young people who read her books, she was a lifeline, someone who finally spoke the truth about what they were going through. Banning her books was an attempt to keep teenagers in a state of innocence, even though that innocence often leads to confusion and lack of knowledge. Another heavy hitter in the banned book world is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. This short novel about two displaced ranch workers during the Great Depression is a staple of American classrooms, yet it is constantly under fire. The reasons include profanity. Some have also challenged it because of the racial language used by some of the characters. Like many of the books on this list, it is banned because it portrays a harsh reality. Steinbeck wasn't trying to write a happy story. He was trying to capture the struggle of the marginalized and the inherent unfairness of the American dream. By banning it, people are trying to shield students from the sadness of the human condition, but in doing so, they also take away a profound lesson in empathy and companionship. One of the most controversial books in the last several decades is American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. When this book was released in 1991, it caused an absolute firestorm. It follows Patrick Bateman, a wealthy Wall Street investment banker who is also a serial perpetrator of extreme violence. The book was banned in several countries and even restricted in parts of the United States. Many critics argued that the graphic, clinical descriptions of violence were unnecessary and served no artistic purpose. However, others argued that Ellis was using Bateman as an extreme metaphor for the shallow, cutthroat consumer culture of the 1980s. It is a book that intentionally pushes the reader to their breaking point, and for many, that point was reached within the first few chapters. It remains a prime example of the shocker novel that forces a debate on the limits of what should be allowed in commercial literature. Now, let's look at a book that was banned for its religious themes but in a very different way. The Last Temptation of Christ by Nikos Kazantzakis. Published in 1955, the novel explores the dual nature of Jesus, focusing heavily on his human side and his struggles with fear, doubt, and desire. The Catholic Church and many other religious organizations were outraged, placing it on the index of forbidden books. They saw the idea of a Jesus who was tempted by a normal life as blasphemous. This controversy eventually followed the book into the world of film when Martin Scorsese adapted it, leading to protests and even attacks on movie theaters. The book is banned because it humanizes a figure that many believe should remain purely divine. It challenges the conventional narrative of faith and asks uncomfortable questions about the nature of sacrifice and divinity. In recent years, one of the most banned books in the United States has been Gender Queer by Maya Kobabe. This graphic memoir explores the author's journey with identity and being non-binary. It has been at the center of a massive wave of book challenges in school districts across the country. Opponents point to graphic illustrations within the book as evidence that it is sexually explicit and inappropriate for schools. Supporters, however, argue that these challenges are an attempt to erase the experiences of the community, and that the book is an essential resource for young people questioning their own identities. This battle represents the current front line of book banning, where social issues and the role of school libraries are being fiercely debated in the public square. Speaking of identity, we have to mention Beloved by Toni Morrison. This novel, which won the Nobel Prize, is a haunting look at the legacy of slavery and the lengths a mother will go to protect her children from a life of bondage. It has been banned for its graphic depictions of violence, its sexual content, and for its intense emotional weight. In some cases, parents have argued that the book is too disturbing and that it makes students feel uncomfortable about history. But that discomfort is exactly the point. Beloved is a ghost story, not just about an individual, but about a nation's history. It refuses to let the past stay buried. And for those who would rather forget the horrors of the past, the book is a threat that must be silenced. Let's shift into the world of graphic novels with Maus by Art Spiegelman. This is a profound work where Spiegelman tells the story of his father's experience during the Holocaust, depicting Jews as mice and their captors as cats. It is widely considered one of the greatest graphic novels of all time, and was the first to win a Pulitzer Prize. However, in recent years, it was famously banned by a school board in Tennessee. The reasons given were inappropriate language and a small drawing of a naked mouse. This sparked a national outcry, as many saw the banning of a Holocaust memoir as a dangerous move toward erasing history. The banning of Maus showed how censors can often focus on small, surface-level details while ignoring the massive, life-changing importance of the overall theme. It reminded the world that we must never stop telling these stories, especially the ones that make us uncomfortable. A book that faced a literal fatwa, or religious decree, is The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. After its publication in 1988, some in the religious community found it blasphemous for its portrayal of certain figures. The controversy was so intense that the leader of Iran issued a call for the author's life, forcing Rushdie into hiding for many years. Bookstores were bombed. This is perhaps the most extreme example of book banning in modern history, where the threat wasn't just a library shelf, but the life of the writer himself. It remains a symbol of the struggle between religious dogma and the right to creative and intellectual freedom. Let's look at another classic, Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This novel is famously narrated by an incredibly unreliable and deeply disturbing character who justifies his obsession with a young girl. Because of its subject matter, it was banned in several countries for years. It is a masterpiece of prose, but its content is understandably repulsive to many. The debate over Lolita often centers on whether a book can be great even if its subject matter is evil. Nabokov himself said the book had no moral, but was rather an aesthetic experience. Censors banned it because they feared it would normalize or encourage harmful behavior, while defenders argue that the book is a brilliant study of a monster's mind, not an endorsement of his actions. We also have to talk about The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Upon its release, it was banned in many parts of California, particularly in the areas where the book was set. It tells the story of Okies migrating to California during the Dust Bowl and being exploited by wealthy landowners. The local governments labeled it communist propaganda and accused Steinbeck of lying about the conditions of the migrant workers. They even burned the book in public. It's an example of how truth can be the most dangerous thing of all to those who benefit from injustice. Steinbeck was documenting a national tragedy, and those in power wanted to silence him to protect their reputations and their profits. Coming back to children's books, Bridge to Terabithia by Catherine Patterson has been frequently banned, which some adults think is too heavy for children. It has also been challenged for its use of profanity and for depicting a life without religion. It is a book that respects the emotional depth of children, allowing them to process grief and sadness through literature. Banning it suggests that we should shield children from the realities of life, but most readers find that the book actually helps them navigate those very realities with more grace and understanding. A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess is another fascinating case. Known for its unique NADSAT language and its unflinching look at ultraviolence, the book explores the nature of free will. It was banned in several places, and even the film adaptation was withdrawn in the UK for years. The central question of the book is whether it is better to be a bad person by choice or a good person by force. This philosophical inquiry was buried under the controversy of its graphic content. Censors were so shocked by the actions of the protagonist that they missed the profound moral argument Burgess was making. It remains a stark reminder that the way we react to violence in art can sometimes prevent us from seeing the deeper meaning behind it. Even the world of comic books hasn't been safe. In the 1950s, a book called Seduction of the Innocent by Frederick Wortham argued that comic books were a primary cause of juvenile delinquency. This led to massive book burnings and the creation of the Comics Code Authority, which essentially self-censored the entire industry for decades. Stories that featured horror, crime, or even social justice were forbidden. It took decades for the industry to break free from these restrictions and prove that comic books were a legitimate and powerful form of storytelling. This era shows how a single influential voice can spark a moral panic that silences an entire medium. Another classic often targeted is A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. This science fiction fantasy is a beloved story of good versus evil, but it has been banned for a confusing mix of reasons. Some religious groups challenged it for being too occult, while others challenged it for being too religious. Some focused on its depiction of a godless society, while others were bothered by the way it mixed science and spirituality. It is a book that defies easy categorization, and that seems to be exactly why it bothers people. It encourages readers to think outside the box and to quest for their own answers, which is often a red flag for those who prefer a more rigid worldview. We should also mention The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. This National Book Award winner tells the story of a young boy growing up on the Spokane Indian Reservation. It has been banned frequently for its use of profanity, its honest discussions of intimacy, and what some call anti-Christian content. However, the book is a vital look at the Native American experience, poverty, and the search for identity. By banning it, people are silencing a perspective that is already too often ignored in our society. The book's humor and heart make it a favorite among young readers, but its honesty makes it a target for adults who want to maintain a more sanitized curriculum. One book that was banned for being unpatriotic is Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. This anti-war novel, based on Vonnegut's own experience in World War II, uses a non-linear structure and alien abductions to explore the trauma of war. It has been banned and even burned in some schools for being irreverent toward the military and for its use of profanity. Vonnegut famously wrote a letter to his school board after they burned his book, defending his work and his character. The book is banned because it refuses to glorify conflict. It portrays the reality of destruction as something chaotic, meaningless, and deeply tragic, which goes against the heroic narrative that many societies want to project. Looking at the world of poetry, Howl by Allen Ginsberg faced a famous obscenity trial in 1957. The poem, which is a searing critique of American materialism and a celebration of nonconformity, was seized by customs officials. The resulting trial was a major victory for the First Amendment, as a judge ruled that the poem had redeeming social importance. Ginsberg's work was a foundational text for the Beat generation, and its banning was an attempt to silence a burgeoning counterculture. It remains a powerful example of how poetry can be just as dangerous as any novel. Finally, let's talk about a book that is often banned for its pessimism, Lord of the Flies by William Golding. This story of schoolboys stranded on an island who descend into savagery is a staple of high school literature. It has been banned for its violence, its use of racial slurs, and its supposed misanthropic view of human nature. Some parents worry that the book is too dark for students, but others argue that it is a necessary exploration of the light and dark within all of us. It is a book that asks what happens when the rules of society are stripped away, and that is an inquiry that many would rather not conduct. The history of banned books is in many ways a history of human fear. We ban what we don't understand, what challenges our beliefs, and what makes us feel uncomfortable. But as we've seen, every time a book is banned, it often becomes more famous and more influential. The act of banning a book is a testament to the power of the written word. It proves that ideas are some of the most potent forces in the world, capable of changing minds and shaking the foundations of societies. When we fight against book banning, we aren't just defending a single story. We are defending the right to think, to question, and to explore the vast, messy, and wonderful landscape of human experience. So next time you see a list of banned books, don't look away. Pick one up, read it, and see for yourself what all the fuss is about. You might just find your new favorite story, and in doing so, you'll be participating in one of the oldest and most important traditions of human freedom. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the vault of forbidden literature. It is quite a journey to see how words on a page can spark so much debate and even fear, but that is the magic of books. They stay with us, they challenge us, and they remind us that the most important conversations are often the ones that start with words someone else didn't want us to hear. Keep reading, keep questioning, and keep those pages turning. The world is full of stories, and none of them should be kept out of your reach. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the incredible power of the written word.